Attention! You're about to hear a story that remained hidden for decades, an account based on rare documents, forgotten testimonies, and archives that nearly disappeared. Before we begin, leave a comment telling us where you are watching from. And if you appreciate historical stories like this, subscribe to the channel. Now turn up the volume, turn off notifications, and join me in this investigation. On a cold morning in February 1973, a history professor at Howard University received a curious package. No return address, no explanation. Inside, a weathered leather case contained dozens of yellowed papers, military documents, personal letters, photographs. The professor almost discarded them. Another donation of war memorabilia, he thought. But something caught his eye. A mission report from 1944 marked with red stamps, classified and not for public disclosure. What he discovered in those papers would change our understanding of a critical chapter in World War II. A chapter about men who fought two wars simultaneously, one against the German Luftwaffe in the skies over Europe, another against prejudice and discrimination within their own military. This is the story of how Black American pilots turned the tide against the most formidable air force of their time, and why their achievements remained in the shadows for decades. In 1941, the United States Army Air Forces faced a problem they did not wish to address. A war was raging in Europe, and American involvement seemed increasingly inevitable. The military needed pilots, thousands of them. Yet they systematically excluded qualified Black Americans from flight training programs. Captain James Washington knew this reality all too well. A graduate of Howard University with a degree in engineering, he had applied to flight school 3 times. 3 times he was rejected, despite exceeding all qualification requirements. "Your qualifications are not in question," read one letter he received in June 1940. However, there are no provisions for Negro pilot training at this time. Washington kept that letter, along with dozens more from other young black men who shared his dream of flying. Men like Marcus Coleman, a mechanic from Detroit who could disassemble and reassemble an engine blindfolded, or Robert Jackson, who had earned his civilian pilot's license by working nights at an airfield in exchange for lessons. They were told again and again that they were not suited for the complexities of military aviation, that they lacked the reflexes, the intelligence, the courage. These were not merely personal rejections. They reflected official United States military policy. A classified study, commissioned by the War Department in 1925, had concluded that Black Americans were inferior to the white man in flying ability. This study, later known as Army War College Memorandum No. 289, remained influential in military thinking for decades, but change was coming. Reluctantly, gradually, powered by both external pressure and military necessity. In January 1941, the United States Army Air Forces announced the formation of an experimental program to train black pilots at Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. The military leadership expected this experiment to fail, expected these men to prove the old assumptions correct. They were mistaken. From a small airfield in Alabama came a force that would eventually include 996 pilots and nearly 14,000 ground personnel, all Black Americans. Most military officials regarded this as a political concession that would have little impact on the war effort. German intelligence took a different view. In a report dated August 6, 1943, Luftwaffe Colonel Otto Müller wrote to his superiors, "We are encountering a new American fighter group in the sector. Their aircraft are distinguished by red-painted tails, their tactics are unusually aggressive, and their skill level is concerning. Request additional information on this unit." The unit in question was the 332nd Fighter Group. The men history would later call the Tuskegee Airmen. Colonel Müller would not be the last German officer to note their presence with concern. Lieutenant Marcus Coleman arrived at Tuskegee in October 1942. His journey there had been anything but direct. After his initial application to the Army Air Forces was rejected, he had worked as a civilian mechanic at Selfridge Field in Michigan. There, he watched white pilots train day after day. "I could fly those planes better," he told his supervisor one afternoon. The white officer laughed, but Coleman was persistent. When the Tuskegee program finally opened, he applied immediately. His mechanical knowledge helped him excel in training. He understood engines in a way few other candidates did. His first letter home, after being accepted, revealed both pride and apprehension. "Dear Mother, they have finally allowed me to train as a pilot. The accommodations are segregated and inferior to those provided to white cadets. The instructors seem determined to wash us out, but I will not give them the satisfaction. We all know we must be twice as good to be considered half as qualified. So we will be twice as good." Coleman's experience was typical. The Tuskegee program was designed with extraordinary difficulty. The washout rate was intentionally high. Training accidents were not uncommon. Those who completed the program had survived a crucible few other American pilots ever faced. Their commanding officer, Major William Thompson, had been assigned to the program as punishment for a dispute with a superior officer. He arrived in Alabama with deep skepticism about the abilities of his new trainees. His early reports reflected this bias. "While some individual cadets show promise," he wrote in December 1942, "I have serious reservations about their suitability for combat operations in the European theater." 6 months later, his assessment had changed dramatically. "The pilots under my command have demonstrated exceptional aptitude for tactical flight operations," he reported in May 1943. "Their formation discipline and gunnery scores exceed those of several conventional training groups I have observed." What had changed Thompson's mind? The evidence in front of his eyes. Every day, these men proved themselves in the air, again and again and again. But even as they excelled in training, questions remained about how they would be deployed. Many senior officers advocated for using them only in segregated support roles, away from critical combat operations. In April 1943, their orders finally came through. The 332nd would deploy to North Africa, then Italy. They would fly escort missions for bomber groups attacking German positions. What happened next would change the course of the air war in Europe. You've been following along so far? If this story is touching you, help us bring it to more people. A like makes a difference. A comment motivates us. A share multiplies our reach. And if you're not yet subscribed, join our community. Now we return to the moment when everything truly started to change. The first combat deployment of the black pilots occurred in June 1943. Their initial missions were limited in scope. Coastal patrols, reconnaissance flights, escort duties in sectors with limited enemy activity. This was no accident. Many in the American command structure expected them to fail, perhaps even wanted them to fail. A classified memorandum from General Emmett Andrews to the War Department in May 1943 stated, "The experimental Negro fighter group should be tested in limited operations before any consideration of expanded deployment." But the pilots of the 332nd had other plans. On July 2, 1943, a formation of 12 P-40 Warhawks, led by Captain James Washington, encountered a group of German Messerschmitt 109 fighters attacking an Allied shipping convoy near Sicily. Despite orders to avoid engagement and maintain their patrol route, Washington made a different decision. "Tuskegee leader to all planes," his radio transmission began. "Enemy aircraft at 2 o'clock. We are engaging. Follow my lead." What followed was the group's first air-to-air combat. The official after-action report documented 3 German aircraft destroyed, 2 probably destroyed, and no American losses. Washington's decision to engage had been a direct violation of standing orders. He was reprimanded upon return to base. The reprimand included a curious statement. While the engagement resulted in enemy losses, such unauthorized actions cannot be tolerated. The focus was entirely on the violation of orders, not on the success achieved. 2 weeks later, the same squadron shot down 7 German aircraft during an escort mission for B-24 bombers targeting rail yards in Italy. Lieutenant Coleman accounted for 2 of those victories. The bomber crews were effusive in their praise. One pilot wrote in his mission log, "The Red Tail Angels stayed with us the entire route, never seen anything like it. Most escort groups chase off after the first German planes they see, leaving us exposed. These boys stuck to us like glue." This comment highlighted a crucial difference in approach. Many white fighter pilots prioritized shooting down enemy aircraft to increase their personal score. The Tuskegee Airmen had been explicitly ordered to prioritize bomber protection over personal victories. They followed these orders with exceptional discipline. By October 1943, the evidence of their effectiveness had become impossible to ignore. The bomber groups specifically requested the Red Tail Angels as escorts for dangerous missions deep into enemy territory. Yet official recognition remained limited. Commendations were delayed or denied. Promotion rates lagged behind those of white fighter groups with comparable or even inferior performance records. Meanwhile, on the German side, the concern was growing. Luftwaffe Major Heinrich Strasser wrote in a tactical assessment in November 1943, "The American fighters with red tail markings maintain tighter escort formations than other units. They demonstrate remarkable fuel discipline, remaining with the bombers throughout the mission envelope. Standard interception tactics are proving less effective against these formations." Another German pilot, captured in December 1943, told his interrogators, "We have standing orders to avoid the American bombers with red-tailed escort when possible. They are too aggressive. Too many of our pilots have not returned from engaging them." This German assessment stands in stark contrast to how these same pilots were described in some American reports from the period. As the air war intensified in early 1944, the 332nd was joined by other squadrons of black pilots. Together, they were increasingly assigned to the most demanding missions of the strategic bombing campaign against Germany. The statistical record of their performance is revealing. From May 1944 to May 1945, bomber groups escorted by these squadrons experienced loss rates approximately 60% lower than the average across all escort groups. Let that sink in. Bombers they protected were 60% more likely to return home, yet official recognition remained grudging and limited. In his private correspondence, Major Thompson expressed growing frustration. "My men are performing at exceptional levels," he wrote to a colleague in March 1944. "They have earned every commendation available, yet receive few. I have submitted 23 recommendations for distinguished flying crosses in the past 3 months. Only 4 have been approved. For identical actions, white pilots receive immediate recognition." The impact on German air operations became increasingly evident as 1944 progressed. The Luftwaffe began to withdraw from sectors where the red-tailed P-51 Mustangs operated. German pilot rotation increased in these areas as experienced pilots requested transfers to other sectors. A captured Luftwaffe operations order from June 1944 contained a telling instruction. When American bomber formations with red-tailed escort are identified, standard interception procedures should be modified. Approach with caution. Break off engagement if escort response is aggressive. In effect, the German Air Force was selectively avoiding engagement with bombers protected by black American pilots. This operational reality stands in stark contrast to the prevailing narrative within some quarters of the American military leadership. Even as the evidence mounted, official assessments remained measured, qualified, reluctant to acknowledge the full impact of these pilots. In July 1944, everything changed. During Operation Frantic, the shuttle bombing campaign between Italy and Soviet bases, the 332nd was assigned to provide escort for B-17 bombers targeting oil refineries in Romania. On the return leg, they encountered a large formation of over 70 German fighters attempting to intercept the now fuel-heavy and vulnerable bombers. What followed was described by one bomber pilot as the most extraordinary air battle I witnessed in 3 years of combat. The 38 red-tailed Mustangs, outnumbered nearly 2-1, not only prevented the Germans from reaching the bomber formation, but shot down 23 enemy aircraft. The bomber group suffered no losses. Lieutenant Marcus Coleman alone accounted for 4 German fighters destroyed that day. His gun camera footage, preserved in the archives discovered by the Howard University professor, shows a level of marksmanship and tactical positioning that astonished later military analysts. The after-action report for this mission went all the way to Army Air Force's headquarters in Washington. There, something unusual happened to it. The report was classified at an unusually high level. Distribution was severely restricted. The remarkable victory was effectively hidden from public view. Why? The answer appears to lie in a handwritten note attached to the report, discovered among the papers delivered to Howard University in 1973. The note, initialed by a general whose signature remains partially illegible, stated simply, "Withhold for morale considerations. Standard recognition protocols to apply." What morale considerations required suppressing news of one of the most successful escort actions of the entire air campaign in Europe? The unspoken answer was clear to the men who had achieved this victory, only to see it buried in classified files. The success of black pilots at this level challenged deep-seated assumptions about racial capability that permeated not just the military, but American society as a whole. It was easier to classify the report than to confront those assumptions. After the war ended in 1945, the accomplishments of these pilots might have faded entirely from public consciousness, if not for the determination of a few individuals to preserve the record. Major William Thompson, who had begun his assignment as a skeptic and ended it as perhaps the most dedicated advocate for his men, spent years after the war attempting to secure proper recognition for the pilots under his command. "These men saved countless lives," he wrote in an appeal to the Army Air Force's Decorations Board in 1946. "Their impact on the air war in Europe was decisive. History deserves an accurate accounting of their contribution." His appeals were largely unsuccessful during his lifetime. Meanwhile, the pilots themselves returned to an America still deeply segregated. Many found they could not get jobs as commercial pilots despite their extensive experience. Airlines routinely rejected them, often without explanation. Captain James Washington, who had led his squadron to destroy 37 German aircraft without losing a single pilot under his command, was turned away from 3 commercial airlines before finding work as a flight instructor at a small airfield that served the black community. In his personal papers, found among the documents delivered to Howard University, he reflected on this contradiction. "We were good enough to fight for democracy," he wrote in 1947. "We were good enough to die for it, but we are not yet permitted to fully live in it." Lieutenant Marcus Coleman, after being rejected by every commercial airline he applied to, used the GI Bill to earn an engineering degree. He eventually worked for NASA, where his expertise contributed to the space program. Yet even there, his war record was rarely discussed or acknowledged. The documents that would eventually reveal the full extent of their accomplishments remained classified. The German assessment of their capabilities, perhaps the most telling evidence of their impact, sat unread in captured archive files. Then, in the 1960s, as the civil rights movement gained momentum, interest in the history of black military service began to grow. Researchers and journalists started asking questions. Former pilots began sharing their stories, often for the first time. In 1970, a military historian named Thomas Collins began researching a comprehensive history of fighter operations in the European theatre. While examining declassified operational records, he noticed a statistical anomaly. The bomber groups with the lowest loss rates had often been escorted by the same fighter squadrons whose contributions had received relatively little attention in previous histories. Collins dug deeper. He filed Freedom of Information Act requests. He interviewed surviving pilots. He compiled loss statistics and mission records. What emerged was a remarkable picture of achievement that had been, intentionally or not, obscured in the official histories of the air war. The data speaks for itself, Collins wrote in 1972. These squadrons achieved the lowest loss rates among all escort groups while operating in the most heavily defended sectors. Their impact on the Luftwaffe's ability to defend German airspace was profound and possibly decisive. Collins's research caught the attention of someone with access to still classified files, someone who believed the time had come for the full story to be told. Hence the package that arrived at Howard University in February 1973. Among the most revealing documents in that package were the captured German records, tactical assessments, pilot briefings, and combat reports that demonstrated the Luftwaffe's growing concern about the red-tailed Mustangs. One Luftwaffe intelligence summary from January 1945 stated plainly, "The American fighter formations with distinctive red tail markings represent the greatest threat to our defensive operations. Their pilots demonstrate superior tactical discipline and exceptional situational awareness. Interception success rates against bomber formations under their protection have fallen to unacceptable levels." By this point in the war, German pilots had begun to call them Schwarze Vogelmenschen, black birdmen. The term reflected a reluctant respect born of hard experience. Another document, a personal letter from a Luftwaffe commander to his family, expressed frustration at the changing air war. "Our younger pilots are now hesitant to engage when these red-tailed aircraft appear. The psychological impact cannot be underestimated. They have claimed too many of our best pilots." These German assessments provide perhaps the most objective evaluation of the impact these pilots had on the air war. The enemy, free from the racial preconceptions that influenced American assessments, judged these men solely on their combat effectiveness and found them formidable. The statistical record tells an equally compelling story. Between May 1943 and May 1945, the squadrons of black pilots flew more than 15,000 sorties. They destroyed or damaged more than 400 German aircraft. And most remarkably, they lost only 27 bombers under their protection. No other escort group in the European theatre could match this record. The impact on the strategic bombing campaign was profound. By 1944, the Luftwaffe had begun concentrating its limited fighter resources away from sectors where these squadrons operated. This created opportunities for the Allied bombing campaign that would otherwise not have existed. A declassified strategic assessment from March 1945, found among the Howard University documents, acknowledged this reality in carefully measured language. The reduced Luftwaffe presence in sectors routinely transited by the 332nd and associated groups has permitted more effective prosecution of strategic targets in these areas. What the document didn't say, but what the statistical record made clear, was that this reduced Luftwaffe presence represented a significant degradation of German air defense capability at a critical phase of the bombing campaign. In effect, these pilots hadn't merely protected the bombers assigned to them, they had helped reshape the entire air defense situation over Germany. After the discovery of these documents in 1973, a gradual reassessment began. Military historians incorporated this new evidence into more comprehensive accounts of the air war. Veterans of the bomber groups came forward with their own testimonies about the effectiveness of their Red Tail Angel escorts. In 1977, a documentary film featuring interviews with surviving pilots brought their story to a wider audience. The film included testimony from German pilots who had faced them in combat. One former Luftwaffe pilot, Karl-Heinz Meyer, stated on camera, "We knew immediately when they were present. Their formation discipline was unlike anything else we encountered. They never left their bombers, and they never missed an opportunity to engage. After a few encounters, many of our pilots began to fear them. Recognition, long delayed, finally began to arrive. In 1978, several pilots received medals that had been recommended during the war, but never approved. The Air Force officially acknowledged the unique contribution these squadrons had made to the Allied victory. For the men who had fought not only the Luftwaffe, but also the prejudice within their own military, this recognition came late. Many had already passed away. Others had built lives and careers far removed from their wartime service. Captain James Washington, who had led that first engagement over Sicily in July 1943, didn't live to see this recognition. He died in 1968 after decades of working at small airfields, his remarkable wartime leadership largely unrecognized outside the community of men who had served under him. His personal logbook, found among the Howard University documents, contains a final entry dated June 17, 1968. "Another young man came by today asking about learning to fly. I told him my story. I told him about our men over there. I told him the sky belongs to everyone brave enough to claim it. Lieutenant Marcus Coleman lived to see the belated recognition. By then, he was Dr. Coleman, with 2 engineering patents to his name and a distinguished career at NASA. When interviewed for the 1977 documentary, he smiled at the filmmaker's questions about how it felt to finally be acknowledged. "The German pilots knew who we were in 1944, he said. "They respected us then. Everyone else is just catching up." The story of how these pilots turned the tide against the Luftwaffe is more than a footnote in military history. It represents a powerful example of excellence prevailing against both a determined enemy abroad and systemic prejudice at home. The classified reports, personal letters, gun camera footage, and German assessments preserved in those documents tell a consistent story. A story of men who were never expected to succeed, but whose success proved so remarkable that it had to be hidden away. Perhaps the most telling evidence comes from the Luftwaffe itself. By late 1944, German air defenses were being systematically adjusted to avoid sectors where these squadrons operated. Enemy aircraft were being withdrawn from areas where they were most needed, simply because the cost of engaging these pilots had become too high. The Luftwaffe never recovered from this strategic disadvantage. As one German commander wrote in March 1945, "The concentrated defense of priority targets has become impossible. We must disperse our remaining aircraft too widely to effectively counter their bombing patterns." That forced dispersal of German air defenses directly contributed to the success of the strategic bombing campaign in the final months of the war. It accelerated the collapse of German industry and transportation networks. It hastened the end of the conflict. And it was driven, in significant part, by pilots who were initially told they lacked the capacity for combat flying. Today, the full record of their achievement is preserved in military archives and museums. The red-tailed P-51 Mustang has become an iconic symbol of their service. Their story is taught in Air Force academies as an example of tactical excellence and the power of meticulous training. Yet perhaps the most important aspect of their legacy lies not in military tactics or statistics, but in what they demonstrated about human potential, about what can be achieved when artificial barriers are removed and excellence is permitted to flourish. In the words of Major William Thompson, written shortly before his death in 1982, "They were simply the best pilots I ever commanded. Not the best black pilots, the best pilots, period. History has finally caught up to what I knew in 1944. The Luftwaffe knew it too, much earlier. End of narrative. This story, like so many others, was almost forgotten. Your support ensures that we continue to rescue these accounts. If you enjoyed this, leave your like. Comment what you thought. Share with others who also appreciate real history, and explore our channel. There are more cases waiting for you. See you in the next episode.